Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Angie Speaks. Thank you to all the new subscribers that have stopped by at my channel. It really means a lot to know that there are people out there that are listening. I really enjoy your engagement, and I am so happy to like and respond to your comments, so feel free to leave as many as you like, as long as they're not mean or like super racist. So today I'm going to be talking about late capitalism and the deleterious effect that it's having on our collective mental health. So stick around, and I hope you enjoy what comes next. Late capitalism is a loose term that's been floating around the internet recently. And as of late, it has become a leftist meme/critique of our current social and economic climate. This term is usually used to critique things like the effects of globalization, mass wealth inequality, disappearing social safety nets, poor economic growth, aggressive advertisement, consumer culture, and the erosion of the boundary between industry and government. It's also a catch-all term that's often used to convey the general absurdity and excess of our current social and economic climate. The images and memes associated with this concept often illustrate feelings of alienation, dark irony, and they often portray modern life as a hellish, surrealist fever dream, curated by tone-deaf corporations and tech companies. We are currently living in the society of the spectacle, a term used by French Marxist Guy Debord to describe a period of history in which the representation of things holds more weight than the reality of things. We are living in a kind of pseudo-world constructed by capitalist interests, and this distorts our view of reality. The fact that we are constantly being shown utopian visions of the future by tech giants, yet we are already experiencing the effects of ecological collapse. The fact that we are constantly being sold images of social progress by institutions like Hollywood, yet institutional forms of oppression continue to function. The fact that we are constantly being force-fed the idea that we live in an egalitarian society, yet the gap between rich and poor continues to grow each decade as capitalism experiences crisis after crisis. This socio-economic phenomenon creates a crazy cognitive dissonance within our collective unconscious, and this can sometimes manifest itself in depression, anxiety, and sometimes even violence. We are living in very strange times, and if you hold anti-capitalist views, you are far more likely to be hyper-aware. This leaves you more vulnerable to the negative psychological effects of this phenomenon, and can also cause or exacerbate many different forms of mental illness. So now it's gonna get a little heavy. We're gonna talk about mental health. In our current climate, mental health issues are often discussed and characterized as individual affects, and the societal and social dimensions of these issues are seldom discussed. For example, a socially isolated person will often be characterized as shy or strange. In this case, all the responsibility is put on the individual, and the individual will often internalize that. But if we look deeper into the life of the socially isolated person, the hours they work, the energy they have left during their free time, the amount of disposable income they have, and so on, these environmental factors all have a huge effect on the amount of time we are able to invest in maintaining healthy social lives. We can see this same principle at play when it comes to all manner of mental health issues, whether it be anxiety, depression, stress disorders, all kinds of different things. And it's often characterized as something completely devoid of any societal influences. And I personally think that that's harmful. The current system can often exacerbate these affects and use them as a tool to reinforce the social status quo, because often what benefits the establishment is detrimental to the human experience. Some of the conventional treatments for these affects are usually more focused on changing the individual to fit society and not challenging society to better fit the needs of human nature. There's a high emphasis on conformity, and there's also this kind of undertone that society as it is functions properly and that the individual is the one that's malfunctioning. This can be a very demoralizing realization. As we move further into late capitalism, the demands on the individual begin to increase. The demands on our time, money, and mental energy are now higher than ever before, and this steals energy from other aspects of our lives. Humans are naturally a social and communal species, and our mental well-being is largely reliant on these communal bonds. We also need to feel useful and valued in our communities. These needs in our nature are constantly dismissed, and we are constantly pressured to sacrifice our humanity on the altar of capital. Precarity is a form of anxiety used by the establishment to keep us motivated. In our current market, labor is cheap and workers are easily replaceable. This creates a sense of urgency and competition that forces us to keep pushing at the expense of our own well-being. Zero-hour contracts and other forms of exploitative employment practices cause this affect to flourish, and it is employed as a medium of brutally enforcing the status quo. Our natural urge to be part of a community as humans is often inverted by the forces of capital. Things like Facebook, for instance, or Twitter offer us the illusion of community, but really act as a hollow substitute. We see this affect flourish in the new social media platforms that have colonized the social commons, the friendly facade that certain companies and businesses try to project, and certain false communal living communities. We're constantly being force-fed images and ideas about success, and some people who don't feel like they match up to that success sometimes completely withdraw socially altogether. In Japan, there is a phenomenon known as Hikikomori. This is when an individual completely breaks the social norms by isolating themselves and becoming a hermit and social outcast. It's an issue that the Japanese government has been quietly dealing with for decades by creating support groups, employing therapists, and using other forms of intervention. A lot of the time, these methods fail to address the problems within Japanese society that cause this behavior to manifest. Many of the socially isolated and withdrawn individuals are faced with tremendous amounts of pressure at school and work. Unable to cope with the intense competition and stress of Japanese society, the Hikikomori rebels by dropping out completely. I've also heard that many of those who withdraw in Japan feel like they have no other alternative in society if they are not functioning in the way that the society demands. There is a form of power in numbers, and the establishment understands that our ability to communicate freely, form communities, support each other, and air our grievances poses the biggest threat to their hegemonic power. If our social experiences are curated by capitalists, they can also control the way we communicate with each other. The more isolated we are, the more powerless we feel, the more likely we are to yield to coercive forms of authority. If we're not careful, these societal bonds will continue to erode. And I'd really hate to think what kind of future we're looking at if we allow that. Honestly, there are a lot of people that don't even consider themselves to be political actors. You know, like the political centrists, people who take their cues from the guys from South Park and like Bill Maher, people who see the far right and the far left as two sides of the same coin. Even though they are not part of the left, even though they may not necessarily even consider themselves to be anti-capitalist, they're still suffering from the same alienation, the same forms of depression, and are desperate for ways to cope with the pressure that surrounds us in society. I personally feel that if this new left that's emerging fails to provide perspective, hope, and community in our interactions with people, then we shouldn't be surprised when opportunists like Jordan Peterson swoop in and take advantage of this vacuum. Not only will these people continue to suffer blindly through the effects of late capitalism, it also leaves them vulnerable to unwittingly absorbing fascist ideology. And we don't need that. We don't need any more fascists around. I am not a psychiatrist, and I'm by no means trying to kind of be prescriptive about what I'm saying, but I would like to share some of the things that I'm currently doing to protect my mental health and to protect the mental health of those around me during these weird times that we're living through at the moment. Self-care. Okay, so I know the term is hideously overused, especially by people who have something to sell. Capitalism has convinced us that self-care is about spending tons of money on expensive retreats and spa days. And I've even heard some leftists refer to self-care whenever it's brought up as like bourgeois nonsense. This is really, really dangerous, and I think that it's super important that all of us take self-care super, super seriously. Self-care is about taking care of all of the boring stuff, making sure you're eating well, sleeping enough, staying hydrated during the day, getting enough movement and exercise, and keeping up with your hygiene. And also taking the time to reconnect with yourself every day. I know it sounds trite, but it's really easy to neglect your body when you're working really long hours or taking care of dependents, or if you're just feeling really depressed. Capitalism sees human beings as disposable commodities, and it's important that we don't internalize this and start treating ourselves that way. Mental vacations. I've noticed that a lot of leftists feel obliged to stay up to date with the latest news and the latest drama surrounding certain issues that we're incredibly passionate about. I am in no way trying to preach the gospel of apathy here. I understand that it's important to be connected and to be present with the things that you feel passionate about, especially politically. But all I'm trying to illustrate is that it's okay to switch off sometimes. There's a general obsessiveness that I've noticed in certain leftist circles, and over time this can become dangerous. I personally feel this way because if we burn out, then we're of no use to anybody at the end of the day. It's also important that you're giving your other interests room to grow and thrive. If you're somebody who's interested in art, if you're somebody who writes, if you're somebody who has some other kind of passion, it's important not to let politics completely overshadow that aspect. And it's also important that you allow yourself to just like enjoy life. I know you probably won't hear a lot of leftists say that And I'm sure there are a lot of leftists out there that will call me like a bourgeois, like idiot or whatever, but I really don't care. Like, we have one life to live on this planet, and it's important for us to be of service and to fight for the things that we believe in. But it's also really important for us to like not be fucking miserable all the time as well. Meditation has also really helped me tremendously. It's given me a lot of perspective into how my mind works, and it's also a great way to help with anxiety. I have anxiety disorder, and I'm incredibly open about the fact that I have anxiety with everybody that I meet. But meditation is a way of grounding yourself and also shutting out the influences of outside and looking within, which is something that is really difficult to do in our current climate because everything's moving so fast and there's so much information. It's kind of a way for you to get back in touch with consensus reality and not necessarily have this like illusion shoved in your face 24/7. With meditation, the important thing is to make sure that you are remaining consistent, because if you have a consistent practice, you're more likely to see results than if you just do it once in a while. And there's also no need to join any groups or societies. There are lots of free resources out there for you to take advantage of. Isolation is poison. And I'm sure we can all agree that in recent months we've seen the ugly results of social isolation in the form of violence and terror attacks. And the problem becomes worse when the social structure reinforces this affect. Social alienation is an epidemic, and as this becomes more widespread, we will continue to see its toxic results. I definitely think that it's important for us to take the benefits of community way more seriously than we have been, especially because it's a fundamental part of our well-being as humans. And we also need to do more to challenge the forces that threaten to erode these social bonds. We need to make time for each other like our lives depend on it, because they do. The more isolated we are, the easier we are to exploit. The less experiences that we share with each other, the easier it is for us to feel as if our problems are unique. We need to start this conversation and make sure that we're not just focusing on theory and deconstructing some fucking shit that some alt-right guy said. We need to also make sure that we're checking in on each other's mental health and also discussing mental health as a political issue. The idea of people coming together and sharing in a community that is uncurated by capitalists scares the shit out of the establishment. This is the attitude that we're gonna have to take if we want to continue to protect our communities from the effects of social erosion that are being caused by late capitalism. I personally believe that the exacerbation of mental illness in this current climate is due to the effects of late capitalism, but I don't see enough people talking about it. So thanks for tuning in to another episode of Angie Speaks. I really hope that you enjoyed today's content, and a lot of the ideas that I've discussed were actually inspired by a really wonderful audio zine called We Are All Very Anxious. I'm gonna leave a link to it in the description. It's way more articulate and conquers a lot of the issues I've been talking about in a far more concise manner. So check it out if you have any free time. Hopefully I will have another video up in the next 2 weeks. So feel free to stop by and hang out with me in the comments section. I'm also gonna be creating a Twitter account so that I can interact with people a little bit more. So I'll keep you guys up to date as to how that goes in the next video. So I shall see you next time, and thank you, goodbye.